You're watching Leap Magazine. We are here at the LCS Finals, and with me yet again, I've got Jason Yeh. How you doing, mate?
I'm pretty good. How you doing?
I would introduce you, but I've got a fancy box coming out right beneath you with all your long title on it. It's good stuff, that, isn't it? Last we spoke, we were talking about, obviously the development of the esport, but also occasionally like the conflicts that happen. Sure. Both as it grows and as a business and everything. And recent events have shown that obviously you go to a certain size, you learn along the way. And you'll have your amount of challenges. In this case, you have an entire league full of them. So the Challenger Series showed us recently some of the issues you faced with the DDoS attacks. Yeah. And obviously some of the problems that arose with team denial, which makes this impossible to Google, because you can't denial and then DDoS. But denial and Dignitas, when they played, denial was actually forced pretty much into a rough situation, both in the beginning when they couldn't pick and ban, but in the end as well when they were forced to forfeit a match they were actually ahead. From a sports perspective, what can you do, if anything, to kind of try and circumvent these issues in the future?
I think taking a step back, like it's good to look at kind of challenger scene as a whole and how it's kind of developed over even just the past year. And I think the reason why we have it in place is we want to make sure that when teams get to LCS, they're already professional organizations that are used to playing regularly. And so I think with that in mind, like we created a set of rules and workflow to make that happen for this year. And I think one of the challenges is the playoff matches up until the final match isn't played in the studio. And I think whenever you have, and this goes for any game that's playing on online servers, there are things that can happen that disrupt the game, and you try to create kind of rules around it to accommodate for it as best you can. Now we'll definitely look in the off season to see like what we can do to ensure that like these matches like are less impacted by these sorts of things. But at the end of the day, I think it's something where there's a lot of things outside of our control that impact that, and whether it's playing on site, whether it's having better best practices to share with teams to better prepare against that. I think there's a lot of different avenues we can take, and we'll look at all of them to see what we can do to ensure that that happens less, especially in important matches next year.
Another thing from that match, which kind of touched upon our last conversation as well, was the inclusion of Gangplank in the second game. Now, obviously, I won't say that one team or the other lost or won because of Gangplank. It's just one champion. But it did raise an interesting question, obviously, that from the gaming perspective of Riot, the one not associated with the eSports, they had a really cool story arc going on, and for the players, that was cool. But for the competitive scene, it was a huge problem that he'd been disabled. And then all of a sudden, he came back when they hadn't had time to prep for it. Is there like a thin line that you kind of need to walk in order to make sure that the competitive scene isn't too affected by fun changes like this?
I think there are. I think at the end of the day, it's important to recognize that there are a lot of things that we will continue to do and can do to focus specifically on like the 0.1% of players who do play the game at a professional level. And I think anything we can do to create kind of a better competitive environment, better entertainment product is worth exploring. And at the same time, we should also continue to figure out fun ways to engage the broader player base, the players who, whether it's like only play or play a lot of ARAM, play a lot of these featured game modes, and then play also a bit of ranked and normal. I think it's a delicate balance, and as a company, I think there's always ways we can improve, and understanding like the trade-offs that we make when we do things that kind of impact different audiences differently, and then better setting expectations and having communications. I think that doing that more effectively in the future will hopefully at least let players from different audiences know kind of the rationale of what we're doing, and kind of avoid tricky situations like this in the future.
It also brings us to the effect currently out in the audience where everybody's sitting. The game's being played is 2 patches behind where we are as players right now. What's because there's no like golden bullet for that one? Because on one hand, like we just discussed, you can't update it real time. That will disrupt the league. But on the other hand, 2 patches behind puts them quite behind in order for changes and balances and things like that. Is there like, I mean, how do you how do you dance that dance? What are the thoughts? What's the thought process going into it?
I think one thing to remember too is like it isn't just like one competitive league happening in one part of the world. Like there's a lot of different regions that have their own professional leagues, regional competitions, worlds qualifications, and so I think we need to or we try to create as balanced of a environment as possible to allow players to, like, they know which patches they'll be playing on, and they can do whatever they can to prepare for it. Now, how that differs from the live patch, I think we like those are trade-offs where like different teams will have different reasons for like resulting in having a specific patch be the one that we play. EU LCS playoffs versus Worlds qualifications versus Worlds itself. Again, I think that just goes to like setting expectations and letting players know like why are we on this patch, and hopefully there are no surprises or negative issues that come out of that.
Has it ever been an issue from the competitive player's point of view? Because I'm looking at like last time Unicorns of Love played. Power of Evil ran, like, I think it was a Runeglaive on Ezreal in a patch where that had been changed. It did nothing. So either he was just admitting defeat and didn't want to show them what their plays were, or he was genuinely put off by it. Has that been an issue that's ever been addressed to you? Or
I think, to be honest, part of being strong at League of Legends as a professional team, as a professional player, is the ability to adapt to different patches, adapt to different play styles. And I think the teams that you see that are more consistently successful are the ones that are more able to adapt their play styles to whatever patch it is that we happen to be playing on, because that shouldn't be a surprise. Like, the players know like in advance which patch it is. So I think it goes to like how teams prepare differently, teams practice differently, and I think some teams might be better prepared than other teams, but at the end of the day, like, we hope all teams will kind of like build workflows and processes that allow them to take advantage of whatever patch we happen to be playing on.
You mentioned the different leagues around the world. You mentioned, we've got things going on in China, all of Europe, America, even Turkey is becoming a thing now. All these different regions all have, all these servers all have a professional league attached, except Europe. We've got 2. We've got Northeast and we've got West. Has it ever been considered at any point separating that and giving the CIS countries their own league? Not only looking at like how sometimes they're the ones obstructed with visa things in order to attend tournaments. That's a problem, obviously, from a competitive point of view. But also looking at the huge eSports scene that exists in the CIS countries. Have you guys looked into how to kind of move in on that a bit more?
Kind of 2 things. So on the one side, like from a regional standpoint, I think it's not too dissimilar from Southeast Asia, where you actually have more. So there is a Vietnamese pro league, there is LMS, but like there is still GPL, where teams from different countries playing on different servers have the opportunity to play against better teams in the region than they would if they just played against teams in their home market. As it relates to CIS, we do have a team in Moscow. We have been like trying to build up the eSport ecosystem in Russian-speaking countries, and I think that's something where there's still a lot of room for improvement, and there's a lot more we can do to promote the local scene and to build kind of a infrastructure around the local scene. So I know that the EU Nordic and East versus the EU West split isn't exactly like Europe versus CIS anyway. But I think at the end of the day, there's definitely, like looking, for example, you mentioned Turkey having such a strong, passionate crowd around the local scene. They also are definitely interested when like Turkish players play in other regions, or like when Worlds happens, to follow the best teams. But I think there's a lot we can learn about making esports relevant for players in like Sweden, Scandinavia, UK, France, Germany, where like we have started first on this kind of regional pan-European approach. I think doing more to invest in helping players care about what's happening at a local level is something that will help to make esports a bigger part of European players' lives.
So you mentioned building up the scenes in the different countries, both in Asia and Turkey and all that. And looking at where we are today in Sweden, I find it relevant to point out that Sweden is one of the few countries, and definitely one of the few Western countries, where the local papers like Aftonbladet run esports, and they even have it on television. Now, normally I'd ask you a question like, is that where we want to go and what you're doing about it? But at the same time, I think we've gotten to a point with esports now where more and more people are pointing out, do we necessarily need to identify ourselves by media acceptance? So the real question here is, do you think that's where esport needs to go next? Do you think we need to go on television, or are you perfectly happy pushing it yourself, becoming your own entity?
I think there's two parts to that. Like we need to go wherever players want to consume media. And if players consume media on mainstream media channels like newspapers and TV, like they do in China and Korea, then it makes sense to figure out how to get there, because the viewing experience on TV, for example, or on a TV, like might be better than watching on an iPad or a tablet or on your laptop. So I think from that perspective, like we just need to figure out like how players want, like how they consume media in different parts of the world and how to get onto those platforms. On the flip side, I will say, one benefit of markets like Sweden, where there is a lot more mainstream awareness and education around it, is that it creates a lot more opportunities for businesses that are not directly tied to esports, but kind of like around esports to get involved, whether that's sponsoring teams, sponsoring leagues, creating like a healthier business ecosystem to help the organizations and the pros themselves have like a more sustainable career and salary, etc. So I think from that perspective, there's more that we can do in certain markets for sure, especially here in Europe, where like we can help strengthen the ecosystem to give teams access to more partners that can like give them more financial flexibility and independence. And I think like where there's opportunity to do that, we should figure out how to do it, but we should do it in a way that is, of course, authentic and creates positive entertainment for players.
I was going to actually say that was it, but then you said something that sparked me just for a second. Very, very short. Do you think we should reach a point, and now I am going to make a regular sports comparison, even though I just said I shouldn't, where players get individual sponsorships? Do you think we should reach a point where it's that professional? Would that be a good thing for the sport?
I think at the end of the day, like brands and companies will figure out like what is the right vehicle to reach their audience. And I think in some cases there absolutely is, there are opportunities to reach large kind of like consumer bases via like the fan circles around specific players. And I think that's just part of the ecosystem evolving. I think at the end of the day, like this is a team sport, this is a team game. And so we do try to emphasize like the organization and the team. But I think there will be opportunities for individual players. In fact, I think there's already a couple of cases of not only players in Europe, but players around the world who have like individual business opportunities and operations that stem from the fact that they had successful esport careers.
Cool. As always, an absolute pleasure talking to you, mate. Yeah. And for the rest of you, for more on the LCS finals, stay tuned to LeapMat.com. Ta.